Cool. All right, there we go. There goes the clicker. Well, thanks everyone for coming along to my talk. I know there's plenty of options here at YOW, so I appreciate that. And I don't think you'll fall asleep with the topic as sort of soothing as asynchronous communication and how we can make our work life a little bit calmer. So as was mentioned, I work at Doist and have done for about sort of 3-4 years at this point in time. Now initially I joined as a front-end engineer but have moved into the leadership track and lead one of the development teams. But Doist itself is the asynchronous first company behind Todoist and Twist. Now what's interesting about this is both of them were developed entirely asynchronously. It wasn't a pandemic that caused our company to sort of go in that direction. It's always done it for 10 to 15 odd years. So for me it was a really great place to join and start to work and learn all of these things about asynchronous, and they'd ironed out a lot of the problems and things. So I was able to pick that up and learn from it. And so that's, you know, I still had a lot to learn though about this style of working, and that's kind of what I want to share with you all today. So first I want to define async and sync first communication, just so that we're all on the same page. So if it's asynchronous communication, is I send a message without expecting an immediate response. So I might send one of my team members a message about an upcoming project that I need them to work on, or a PR that's been done, and then I kind of leave that. I don't have any expectations. There's more to that. We'll cover that in a sec, but that's the general idea. Synchronous or real-time communication is sort of the opposite of that. I send a message. My expectation is that they're going to start processing that information and respond to me straight away, which is likely what most of the folks here are used to now, even if you are working remotely in your company. But there's companies out there that are going against this, and they're embracing sort of an async-first communication style and, importantly, succeeding at that. Now, when I was working on this talk, like, it's always good to have some sort of a hook, right? Like, what's my selling point for this? And my first thought was like, you no longer have to wear pants, right? If you're working at home. They're unnecessary. Trackies are the real way to work naturally. I could talk about the fact that we don't need to drive to work anymore and avoid the sort of high costs and the aggression on the roads. The RAC in WA did a sort of report and a study and showed that aggression on the road is only kind of getting more and more, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. There's the time it takes to get to work. We could all save hours a week. I did a quick look for what the average here is in Brisbane and Queensland, and it was about 61 minutes per day that is just commuting. Now, they're all good reasons, right? And hybrid styles have these too, and remote, so they don't always apply to everyone. So what is it though? So time kind of stuck out to me as the hook that I could use for this. Now, who here doesn't wish they had a bit more time, right? For your family, hobbies, friends, whatever it might be. After considering this a little bit more, right, I was like, I don't think I can talk about pants for 40 minutes. But what I could do, a common item is my calendar that comes up when I talk about asynchronous communication. Now, this is a typical week of my calendar. I have a couple of one-on-ones, but the rest of it is open space, which I can use to work and be productive. What about those with more direct reports than me, though? What do theirs look like? So we have the head of design, their calendar. We have the head of Android, a couple more there, but that's changed a bit. Hello. All the way up to our CEO, Amir. Now, a few of us probably wished our calendars looked a bit more like this, right? It enables the ability to focus on deep work and reaching this flow state that we can do instead. And that's where it enables finding the best solution, not necessarily just the fastest solution that you can do. Because you're spending time exploring and working rather than constantly context switching. And it prevents our days looking like this. Does this resemble anyone else's calendar in here? There's a few quick hands going up there like, oh no, how did he get into my calendar? Just sort of artistic representation of that there. Now, it's kind of like, it's been likened to having too many tabs open, but in your brain, right? There's too much overwhelm in there when all of these things are overlapping. There's nothing you can do with that to be productive. And if your calendar has felt more sort of, I guess, packed since the pandemic, it's not your imagination. Microsoft Work Trend Index showed that there was a 253% increase in meetings and things since the pandemic, right? Which is pretty staggering. So the shoulder taps of the office just turned into notifications on our devices. And the meetings just became Zoom calls, right? They just kind of naturally transitioned. Now, many of us aren't able to get this time that we're talking about. 80% of our day is spent communicating with colleagues, and it could be meetings, emails, instant messaging, often all of them at the same time. Pretend you heard a calendar sound just then. Because people up there in the top thing, my sound isn't working. So the sound of an email or a calendar invite can cause us some stress, right, in our day, or our team stress. Or the sound of instant messages can do the same. This need to appear connected has created kind of an always-on culture with these little icons on our phones giving our team anxiety that there must be something here that I'm needing to look at. Or how am all my team going to know that I'm also working at the same time? Now, out of curiosity, judgment-free space. Has anyone sent Slack messages in talks that they've been to so far here? Oh, not many hands. Oh, they're slowly going up. They're like, is it a judgment-free space? Right? So it happens. These things kind of get into our work and into our things when we're meant to be concentrating on other elements. But this communication style, which we sort of pretend is productive, prevents us from doing the real work that we need to do, working through complex design problems, fixing a bug, planning for the next quarter, whatever it is that your day kind of holds in there. The work that our team benefits from uninterrupted concentration and reaching a flow state. And this is where we all know that like the real ideas and the best solutions are going to come from, yeah? Now to counter this, folks are spending time, typically in the night, working in their own time effectively, right? Just to try and have any chance of reaching this flow state. It's a very quick track to burnout. I happened to overhear a conversation out in the hallway the other day where someone says, I'm not burnt out, but I'm definitely feeling a little crispy on the edges. And I thought, it's kind of burnout on the way. Now, each of these may seem quick, right? Have you got time to jump onto a quick call? But there's a time cost, and that tends to be about 23 minutes on average to get back into the flow of what you were doing. So the few minutes in Slack or Zoom quickly become 30 minutes of actual time disappearing. And trying to juggle all of these notifications, there was 2 stats that I found about this. It's either missing a night's sleep or the same IQ drop as marijuana. So pick which one you can relate to. And then we kind of think about, well, how can we regain focus time to solve our problems? Prioritize being productive over just necessarily being connected. Now, with all that in mind, what's the first step here? What do we do? Can we just sort of cancel all of our meetings and close Slack or Teams or whatever it is that you use, right? And that could work. You might not be very popular or potentially employed for very long if you did that. But, it would be quiet. But a near empty calendar is the goal that we can kind of look at here. And it's a calendar where you can truly set time aside to focus, get into that flow state that you want to do. And this is where async tends to shine. It's not, what does it mean though to be async, right? We often focus on the meetings part of it. But there's a whole sort of system and way of working, aspects across all of our work areas that make async, right? It's not just about cancelling meetings all the time. So how can it be done, right? I want to introduce the pillars of async. And this is what we've sort of come to know as a best way of working in this area that makes the team really strong, gets everyone to do their work, but is importantly also focusing on our team members' well-being and mental health at the same time, preventing burnout, right? But it takes time to get to each of these. So this list is not sort of you have to have every single one of them. You can look at sort of implementing some of these as you go, right? You don't have to have it all. And the first of those is vision, mission, and values. So these may exist in your wiki already, but you probably have an idea of what they would mean in your company. Now on the screen is Doist. Again, you know, that's just what we have. It's more just there as an example of some of these guiding sort of practices and areas that you can do. And there's also our mission, which is empowering people with simple yet powerful tools. Now, why these are important, it's sort of an essential first step, is having as much buy-in as possible. And so that can be helped when you're all contributing to the same goal and mission. This way that if it enables us to hold each other accountable if we start to veer off course by going back to these values and mission statements that we have. Now, one of the ways I saw this being demonstrated when I joined Doist was the onboarding process. So in jobs that I've started before, you get to the office, you might be shown around, there's a bit of nerves and excitement there, but they really vary from that point onwards. Like, do you know what you have to do or do you not know what you have to do? Often it was the latter of those. Now, in an async world, I've gone from my bed to my desk, right? And so it's really important that we do this properly. It's a weird feeling that your job just becomes bed to desk all of a sudden. So how do we make this sort of onboarding process, bring those people in without the face-to-face part of it? So it made it better. I had a mentor assigned. I had a welcome message from everyone from the entire company there, a list of things to get through during my first week as well. And these varied from reading the documentation, setting up the development environment, some fun things like just sharing 10 things about myself so everyone started to get to know, you know, who I was rather than just an avatar. And even a note was on there to like leave early on the first day, right? Because it can all be pretty overwhelming. It was sort of thoughtful and it showed that the company lived behind these values and missions that we were talking about. The next we have is defaulting to trust. I think this is essential, really, for async-first communication as well. If your team's going to work from anywhere at any time, there needs to be trust, right? The same as any kind of healthy relationship. Your teammates can trust that you'll do what you said you were going to do and that they'll do the same in return when you ask that. Now, you have to assume kind of a healthy level of trust. And I kind of like this example from Toby Lutke at Spotify of the trust battery. You have to kind of start at 50% trust, right? Just by default. And then all your interactions are either hopefully going to charge that battery or worst case scenario, discharge that battery. But we want to aim on how we can do that all the time, how we can increase the trust battery there. One of the ways we found was before when I was giving the example of like async, I just send them a message and walk off. Right? One of the ways we found to help build trust, because it starts to feel like, oh, are they ignoring me? Or, you know, is there a problem here? But that's typically not the case, right? They're just busy in their flow state. So what we decided to help with that is have a maximum of 24 hours that we agreed to respond to a message. And in that time, you can think about it, process the information, and make sure that you're giving a good response. If you leave it sort of too much longer than that with all the time zones, then it can start to really kind of drag out. Now that can even mean, right, you stop by that person or the message that they've sent you and said, yep, this is on my radar. I'll respond to you at this point in time. And the important part there is to do that, right? Because we're trying to build trust here in this scenario. Play around with this thing. 24 hours works for where we are, but you might start at a more reasonable, say, 8 hours and build on from there, particularly as you start to find value in that time that is uninterrupted. But trust is a big topic. So there's an article here on how to build trust in remote workplaces that will run through this in sort of more detail so that it can help you with that. And see if your phone's in the air, so I'll just pad this space. It's walking. Autonomy. You would have heard some of this talked about, like if you went to Joachim's talk from Spotify, how autonomy enabled them to release one of the biggest features that they've had at Spotify. And that's why I really like this autonomy, but responsibility forms an important part of that as well. So now you get to structure your day in this setup how you would like. and gain autonomy, right? Organize work around life instead of the other way around, which we sort of typically do now. If you're a night owl and want to work in the evening, well, that should be fine. If you need to stop during the day and you have an errand when it's quiet, that should also be fine, right? That shouldn't kind of impact anyone. So how can we enable that level of autonomy while we maintain the responsibility as well? We split our teams up. Again, if you saw Joachim's talk, this might sort of be resonating with you or being kind of familiar. But we split our teams up into these little squads of workers. So whatever their work that they have to do, be it a marketing initiative, new emails, landing pages, whatever it is, we take the people from the permanent functional teams and we create cross-functional teams that have the people in there that know how to do that work. And a squad like this can last a month or more. It just sort of depends on the level of work. We've been playing around with 3 monthly squads at this point in time. The responsibility part comes into that within your squad. So instead of daily stand-ups and the ceremonies that exist in some of these things, which are impossible over time zones, what we do is have a weekly snippet. So in there, you'll talk about some of what you've done. That can be useful, but importantly, what you're going to get through in the week ahead, and really important, if there's any problems that have come up in that time. Because if we know the problems, then the team can sort of gather around that and try and address it, right, before it becomes a big problem. And this was an area that I sort of struggled with when I was first starting async work. I kept checking Doist, which is our tool, but it doesn't fully matter, thinking I must be missing something in here, right? There's no messages flowing in there or anything like that. I was starting to just wonder, like, is my internet working? It's not like these sort of Slack things. But it helped sort of my health and well-being, being able to kind of go to the gym or do something at 9:30 in the morning and still knowing exactly what I had to do and be done by the end of the week. Now, because all of these conversations aren't happening in real time like we do with sync work, one of the easiest ways to avoid being a blocker is by adopting the idea of transparency by default. Now, if there's a document, server, whatever it might be that your team needs access to, it could be a long turnaround before that happens. We've been playing around with 24 hours, right? Now, this is true for hybrid teams as well. How do you make sure that those working hybrid feel part of the team and not just a sort of third party and the decisions are made in the office? And this is kind of how we level that playing field and keep everyone included. We avoid it by, just make it as open as possible. So if I wanted to, I can access planning documents, even financial reports are sort of all in our thing and we can access it. Now, it's not everything, right? If there's sort of an issue that's like a person-to-person kind of thing or HR information, that stuff is still private. But outside of those things, work-wise, if I need to catch up on a thread, progress of work, or you get put into a project, you can catch up on all of this if all of it's open and available, not in sort of email or that. Now, if you as an individual, right, some of the things that people ask me is, if I'm not leading, how can I get this going? And this is one of the ways that you can do that, right? Make sure as much of your information and work and what you're doing is as open as possible in the first place. GitLab are a really good example of kind of living this transparent by default life in their handbook, which all of their documentation is, but importantly is public as well. So they're really transparent in there. Now that kind of leads us nicely into everyone being a writer. If writing becomes the core of how you communicate at this point in time, then it can't sort of be understated how important the sort of clear, concise, and clear, concise, and engaging communication is when we sort of switch to this style of working. Documentation, when you're doing this, starts to become basically automatic, right? It's the part we least like doing. But if we're writing by default, then these things start to become automatic and we don't need to focus on it as much as what we otherwise would need to. Now, when a decision is required, typically we'll write it in our communication tool and do that. Or if the conversation has happened in real time, then we need to bring that back into whatever that sort of tool is that we're using for it. What I sort of like about this outside of the writing is how inclusive async-first communication starts to become. being the loudest person in the room at this point isn't like a prerequisite to getting your point of view across at this point when you're doing this. You've got that 24 hours to think about it. Make sure that you say what you want to say and make it as articulate as possible. And if you've ever walked out of a meeting before and thought, I had those 5 points that I wanted to add to that meeting, or if you have a team member that does that, this sort of style of working can really help alleviate those problems, right? They're not going to think about that. They've got time to do it. And, a downside of this is that the decisions will take longer, right? Definitely. But what you lose in this version of time, you gain in the quality and, importantly, the diversity of the opinion and the input that you have. There's no sort of playing cards or t-shirt sizes required when you can just talk it out and get through this conversation. I like this t-shirt. If I didn't have my special donut one, I think my speaking one would be kind of this one. Written communication allows you time to think, right, and avoid these knee-jerk reactions that we can sometimes have. I'm sure we're all probably guilty of doing this sometimes in a thing where you just say it and you regret doing that, right? Again, you can focus on the clear, concise, engaging part of that and avoid doing those words. Or even if you have written it, the unsent message, you can write it all out how you kind of really feel, but then don't send it and then write the version that you kind of, is business appropriate. And it's a really great way to sort of rubber duck yourself as well. There's been many times where I've kind of been having a problem and I start to write down all of the issues and things that I'm experiencing in there. And in doing so, kind of get myself to the point of realization and go, oh, here's something that I've missed. Or even if you don't reach that point, what you can do is instead of messaging your colleague and saying, hey, can you help me? And then starting that process, you're ready to send them all the information they need to sort of be ready and start helping you, right? Rather than disconnecting them from what they're doing and starting that whole process. Time zones, particularly for us in Australia, right, where we're in a weird spot with time zones. The international speakers who have come here will tell you that this time zone is very confusing. But those of us with kids or hobbies or things outside of work can benefit from this as well, where if you don't need your input or you want to have input, you can do it in your time. Or again, if you don't need to have it, you can step away from that without having been locked into an hour-long meeting that it's awkward to exit from at that point. So what's something you can do, again, as an individual to do this? You can look at how you can sort of over-communicate in the first place. Start documenting and writing more. This can be creating sort of a write-up about the meeting that you have and sending that to everyone before you do it. And then with any luck, then you don't need to have the meeting in the first place, right? You can sort of avoid it. Or even if that does go ahead, then you can take notes and do that thing and share it far and wide to make sure that everyone is on the same page and avoid confusion or misunderstanding of that information as well. This is another article that just kind of talks about how you can write the way that your co-workers actually read it. There's a little pyramid in there that is essentially get to the point at the first part, and then you add the extra information on there. So I found it quite an interesting read, included it in the talk here. Now, I mentioned these blurred lines between work and life when we started working remotely. Digital presenteeism has become a real problem. So much so that the Australia introduced these right to disconnect laws. Now, is anyone familiar or started following these? All right, so people are familiar. Is anyone's company following them? All right, less hands, but there was still one in there. So from August this year, you have the right to refuse to monitor, read or respond to contact outside of your working hours. In small businesses, it's the same time next year. But it's a good time to start practicing this now. But interesting that we had to bring laws in to sort of do this, to help this in the first place. So responding to these messages outside of hours is not sustainable for anyone, right? We shouldn't feel like we're letting the team down if we don't respond to them. And with this async style, that shouldn't be the case. And this is where this next one comes in. You focus hard during your work hours and then disconnect fully after that. Now, focus hard is, let's say, using the 8 hours of your work day, and you've blocked that time out, and that's what we do, right? Nothing else in there. Outside of that, you disconnect. You don't participate in anything work-related. This is where you rest, recover, spend time with family, friends, and do those things that are important to you. And I kind of needed help with this when I started working asynchronously as well. The old places I worked at sort of, let's say unofficially, had these requirements that you would respond to these messages and do these things outside of it. Now, your work colleagues aren't going to form much of your kind of personal relationship in this style. So it's important, like, how do we deliberately disconnect? So hopefully there's trust in your workplace. That's a good starting point. So turn notifications off. Potentially, I bet you'll never guess which app that is. Better yet, don't even have them on your phone in the first place, right? Why do they need to be there? Another more fun yet kind of practical one is we have what we call the vacation police. So if we know that you're not meant to be at work, right, we have out of office and things like that, and you start sending messages, the little police person emoji is going to start appearing on your messages, like en masse. And then eventually they're going to get, if it keeps happening, they're going to get a message from the vacation police sort of saying, hey, your time's important. Stop responding to messages. So again, as an individual, or potentially as a step up in the managing lead area, start being the vacation police in your office and saying your time's important and valuable. You should enjoy it fully. So about this disconnect, and one of the downsides or the, let's say, difficult areas of async is how do you still remain kind of a functioning member of society? Things that I've done is like have casual hangouts in my area, having hour-long calls on a Wednesday with people in the community as well, just to discuss things. It doesn't have to be work, but sometimes it's programming related. I've talked about sort of going and exercising, the importance of that, having lunch with with sort of previous colleagues and family and things. You do want to make this a priority if you do sort of start looking at this, just to avoid that feeling of isolation that can be present in this working environment, right? There's always downsides to things. But it's how you make it work for you. And I've found that not having my work colleagues be sort of such a big part of my social life has been much healthier for me and important for the relationships I have. And also makes moving between careers and things less of a burden when there's an opportunity that comes up. For this next one, it does help to have a few of the other pillars in place first for this. I've kind of referred to trust a few times in this one. It's about sort of focusing on the outcomes over necessarily the hours that you have worked. So we have these smaller independent squads that we've talked about. They're working on those things. The tasks have been defined and planned, so we can step away from the number of hours and instead look at, well, have the outcomes been achieved in the first place, right? That's what's kind of more important. And we generally have found this to be more valuable as well. So if we've had one person that's worked 40 hours a week or whatever it may be that is standard and didn't reach the outcomes, yet we've had someone who'd worked less hours than 40 per week but did meet the outcome, well, aren't we in a better point at that, right? They may have had an appointment, something that they had to do with kids, but they've still made it. So we shouldn't need to track folks based on like mouse movements and this idea of productivity around lines of code that's sort of been popping up again recently and comes up every now and then for those of us that work in the developer space. Did we finish what we actually needed to do? And this helps with the feeling of your work being important rather than the appearance of working. Now, hands-on management is one as well that the manager needs to understand what they're looking at if you start to work in this type of thing. And this could mean like design, development, marketing, whatever area that you work on. But if you need to be able to understand the work of the people that you're managing, or your manager needs to understand the type of work that you do. And it helps them to, again, look at whether the outcome was reached and give you an opportunity to help with areas for growth and one-on-ones and things that you need to work on in your career to reach the next level. So this isn't about kind of micromanaging in that. It's about just sort of understanding what they do. If the manager doesn't have this, what you tend to do is revert back to these sync-first approaches of, oh, we'll need to have a meeting to discuss this, or we'll have lots of emails or Slack messages back and forth, and all of these things start to dissolve trust between you and your lead. Now, this is the last one, and potentially the most surprising, given everything that I've just sort of talked about. But I've tried to be deliberate in saying async first, right? And it's not async only. We still need to build connections, like genuine connections with the people that we work with. That's why we sort of come to things like this as well. Now, understand them as people, their motivations, hopes, dreams, all of those sort of things. Pictured on the slide and the screen is our sort of pyramid of async communication. And it's a little bit like the food pyramid. There's the things we have at the bottom that we should, be doing lots of, which is our async communication. And then the things at the top, which are more like candy and ice cream that I missed out on lunch, but I'm not sad about it. And those are the things that we do kind of less of the time. Now, some of the scenarios we see kind of the sync work still being important is like one-on-ones for those growth conversations that we talked about. During an emergency, if there's like a problem and we need to talk through that, the sync-first communication can work pretty well there. Project kickoffs and alignment are a good way to do this. And I just want to say though, it's not doing like the planning. We should have already done all of that. It's really the ceremony part of like kicking that off and making sure that we're all like doing it together at the same time. Critical feedback is another thing. Again, like we will have written it and sent that to them, but I think the delivery of being in person can be valuable, again, for trust and just communicating the emotion of that thing. If you just email it to someone, that can be a problem. But we don't want it just to be like work-related or problems, right? Because anytime we get a meeting or something like that, we're going to be pretty critical about like what it is they're going to talk to us about. So there's other things we've done, like social hangouts, where we'll use an hour of time. That was our Halloween-themed one. We'll use an hour of time just to kind of chat and do that. But importantly, that time is work time, not our own time. Retreats are another one. So some of these other ones were the retreats. So we have kind of a few flavors of this, where new starters will have a mentor somewhere in the world. And we'll fly them to where they are, and they'll spend a week there to really embed and get up to speed with that. We found that works really well, making sure that they know what they're doing and they can ask those questions that you have. The team retreats are similar in that we just get those little functional teams together to do some of the planning and the talking and going through how we work and what we do. And the fun one, this was the most recent one in Ireland, Dublin, with this castle that you could stay in, is you get the whole company together. And it's important because you put faces to avatars and understand how people talk, which changes how you read their communication in the tool. And if you misunderstood them before, you can start to read it and do that. Or in my case, how tall everyone is compared to me, which is really depressing a lot of the time. These are great, and it boosts team morale, and you can see it immediately, not just while we're there, but in the weeks and months that follow from that. So those are the pillars of async, things that you can do to start to build up and implement async within your working environment. To wrap up, as an individual, like these are things that you can try and do immediately to focus on some of these areas. So we kind of talked about over-communicating. Maybe if there's trust, you can say no to unnecessary meetings, or at least start the conversation and challenge it where you can. Turn off notifications, right? That's a fun one. It's quite therapeutic, actually, deleting some of these apps. I don't know if you've tried it before. Or always check those documents and settings that you have. On the other side, if you're in more of a lead and you can drive some of these decisions within your company or are interested in this, evaluating based on the output, making the transparency thing. And one of the interesting ones is using tools that promote transparency. One of the examples that I've given before is if the tool that you use, if you press enter and that sends the message rather than starting a new line, it's probably not well suited for async communication, right? It's suited for that rapid fire. I'm just going to keep picking on Slack just because I've been doing it. That Slack-style communication that goes. So there's lots of things. Heroes and housekeeping is something that someone was asking me before. Is like, well, how do you protect the team from that? So we kind of sacrifice one person to handle bugs and communication and things like that. And we rotate that through. It helps to share the knowledge of what you're doing and any problems and things that come up along the way. If you'd like to learn more, there's a few resources here as well from, GitLab have been doing it for a long time. We've been doing it for a fair while as well. And so there's lots of resources out there that can go, into a lot more depth than sort of a 40-minute talk can. If you have any questions, I hope we might have some time, but otherwise you'll see me out there. I tend to be very difficult to find in this shirt, but do your best. The team kind of likes hearing about how this goes. Don't forget to do the feedback and everything like that. I'm always curious to hear about what people sort of want to know about or what I could add to the talk or ways to improve it. So that's always super helpful. But otherwise, thanks very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.